So we're going to start this evening. We have 2 workshops to cover before the business meeting, and we're going to jump right into it with the request that we received as to renaming King Middle School. I'll just turn it over to Javier to get us started.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. Today we've got the workshop on renaming King Middle School, and then also following that, the workshop on the second workshop on our facility and capacity analysis. And so let's start with renaming King School. What we are going to do today, as Chair Terraro mentioned, is we had a proposal, a request from Councilor Ali, from State Representative Talbot Ross, and from Mayor Strimling for the board to take under consideration renaming the Ellen King Middle School as the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Middle School. And so what we wanted to do today is put in front of the board what the process could be for considering this request, and then listening to any questions and concerns that you might have, and talk about what our next steps are with that. So as I mentioned earlier, we received a letter from those 3 prominent elected officials asking us to consider this. They noted that this is the 50th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's murder, and also it's something that the city of Portland has been trying to do for a while, to find a meaningful way to honor Dr. Martin Luther King's memory, and has not quite landed one, and this seemed to be a option. We've, in my time here, so, now entering my 3rd year, I did have, I think during my first year, staff at King mentioned that this was a possibility, something that they had talked about as a faculty, and Principal Leclerc is here too as well for to sort of corroborate that. And so that's the request. Our board policy FF is the one that governs the naming of facilities. It's in your packet, so you have access to that. It says that facilities are named for these 5 reasons, and so obviously Dr. King fits into several of those categories, and so does the current namesake of the school, Ellen King, who was a former principal in the school system in the early part of the 20th century, who was principal of Clifford Elementary when she was in the district, and then she was also district level superintendent, so sort of oversaw, I believe, middle schools or something like that at the time. The policy also says that for the board to act, that you will notify the public of the intent, request suggestions by a set date, and then establish a review panel. The board policy specifies that the panel has to have at least 1 board member, but it also does say that the entire board may sit as the review panel, and it specifies that you must act on the name change at a public meeting and notify the city council after the change is made. So that's what the policy says. My proposal is that you provide notice of intent to rename the school, and then on October 4th, we hold a public hearing on the naming, and after the hearing, hold a workshop on the naming to discuss if there are other options that came out of the public hearing that you may want to consider, then have a first read on that date, and then on October 18th, take action, formal action on renaming if you choose to move in that direction. So that's my proposal based on what the policy says and sort of where we are. I think that this is something that board members have expressed an interest in in pursuing, and so it's somewhat different from the way that the policy is envisioned, where it's sort of the board initiating it. In this case, it's actually initiated at the request of community members, and so I'm sort of proposing to sort of pass on the process where you ask people for suggestions because you already have a suggestion in place, which is naming it for Dr. Martin Luther King. So that's it.
So we're looking for feedback basically on that process. As you can see, it's kind of a not a lengthy process. We didn't think that it necessarily needed to be too detailed, but it has public input, and it brings us to a vote in October. So thoughts on that, Ms. Thompson?
I have a couple questions. In the letter from the councilors, the mayor and the state representative, Talbot Ross, in the second paragraph, it talks about strong public support among the people of Portland. And I don't know, I know there's been a lot of discussion around it when there was talk about renaming Marginal Way potentially in other places. And so I guess what I would like to see first and foremost is the statement of strong public support. What was done, the lead up to that, to get the words of strong public support. Also, I find the timeline to be too quick to reach out to the community. We started receiving emails from people, and I think that the conversation should be had community-wide, not just in October 4th, October 18th. I don't see what the rush is. I think we should really make sure that it's something the community wants to do, because there are some people that do have ties to this particular person. So for me personally, one, I would want to know the statement of strong support. What data do we have behind that? And second, of looking at the timeline to extend it a little bit more, because I don't understand what the rush is. So.
And what would you consider, so what are you looking for in terms of the statements of support? What would you want, a petition? Do you want like a lot of people to show up at the hearing?
So with the statement, you mean within the letter? So I want to know, like backtracking, when the council discussed it, where they provided with information saying they had X amount of public hearings, or they had a survey done, or what did they have to make the statement strong public support? Because I remember that there was articles in the newspaper, but again, I wasn't really into the discussion at that time. So I'm not sure. There could be strong public support, but I don't know. And so I want to know how we make that statement, because I know there are groups of people that would like this, and but I haven't heard from the community wide. So that's what I'm talking about. And then with regards to the timeline, I think that October 4th, holding a public hearing a month from now, I think and then having a first read on the resolution. I mean, it's so quick. So I don't know why the rush.
It's a proposal for discussion.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
What would you propose?
I would propose October would be the time that we do the outreach, and then maybe bring it back in November for a first read. But I think we have to have a little bit more cushion around that, and including the public, and making sure, again, that they're well aware of it. A month, I think there was a lot of discussion at council level when they brought up renaming various things, and I don't think a month is sufficient, so I would stretch it probably through November.
Ms. Morioni, and then Ms. Yuri.
I echo what Ms. Thompson said about, I don't feel like we had quite enough understanding as to why even the mayor and Ms. Talbot Ross or even Mr. Ali put this forward, besides the, first of all, it's Helen King.
I apologize
Yeah.
for that. Yeah.
But I don't even know who exactly Helen King is, but there may be people in the community that know more about that I'd love to hear from, or at least know a little bit more about that piece as well.
There's a blurb in the board packet on.
Yeah, I saw the little blurb,
That's all we
but
have,
that's all we
really.
have.
Yeah.
But I imagine there's Portland historians, somebody, I don't know. Bottom line is, changing the name of a school, to me, I agree that we need more time. I think we have so many big fish to fry right now. I have so many big things to work on. This, to me, is important, but unless I have a compelling reason that we really should do that right now and work on this and take board and staff time to work on it, I'm not inclined to do it. So I would defer to my colleagues, the rest of the board, and what they'd like to do, but I'm not in a huge advocate right now to do this work. Thank you.
Ms. Yuri?
Thanks so much, Madam Chair. I apologize, I've just stepped in. I have a college class right before this. But from what I've been hearing, I'd really love to hear more about what the King Middle School community and students and staff are thinking about this. I'm a proud alumni of King Middle School. I love King Middle School. And I know that they're a school that's really involved in these really authentic project-based learning, and this seems right up their alley. I think that we should put the ball in their court and see more about, do outreach. Obviously, we have a public hearing, but that can be hard to get middle school kids involved in that. And I'd love that if the board could reach out a little bit more to that school and get in those classrooms and see what do kids think about it, and have kids prep and have teachers prep kids a little more about what's happening, because that's their community. So it's just inviting that it's not just like Portland Public Schools here issue, it's their issue too. So if we're going to tackle it, I think that it should be more in their hands. Thanks.
Mr. Belfons?
So I'm just curious how this timeline compares to the timeline for the name change for Hall to Rowe.
It's similar.
Similar? Okay. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Thank you, Chair. So I think, I'm sorry. I think that Mr. Urias just brought up a really good point, and I think it was pretty much the way that I came into this conversation was let's have an opportunity to hear what the community has to say. Certainly the King Middle School community, but the greater Portland community, right? Have everybody come in and discuss as much as we can, within reason, engage with people. I think Javier made a good point a couple of meetings ago where he says, at one point you're going to get to the day that we vote, and there's always going to be somebody saying, whoa, when did this happen? I didn't know this was going on. So we're always going to miss getting in touch with everybody about the process. But as long as we create an environment where it is conducive to get people involved and getting the opinions of the community, I think that's what's important to me, hearing what they feel they want to do with their schools. Thank you.
Anyone else? So I don't think that we're necessarily, committed to this timeline. It was something that we proposed because we thought that it would be kind of efficient, and we didn't anticipate that it would be highly controversial. But what I'm hearing from people is that there's more want for public input, school input, and particularly to hear from the people who are actually proposing this and bringing this to us, maybe about some history. And Ms. Thompson, did you want to clarify?
No, I was just concurring, but also if the council has information, because they've talked about it, I think at least once or twice or 3 times now, about various parts of the city to rename, that maybe they have some information that they can provide to us too for our leisure reading.
Okay. Mr. Rodriguez?
Thank you. Just real quick, the city, there was a Martin Luther King task force assembled, so I'm sure there's information available that they've gathered. Thank you.
So perhaps what we could do is kind of add some process on the front end of this that would be kind of gathering those sort of constituent pieces and data information, and then kind of push the dates back a little bit. I think the only timeline constraint that we really had was that we were hoping, if we're going to do this, that we would have it in time for Martin Luther King Day. It's a special anniversary this year, so. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay.
Right.